What's going on? What's going on out there? Colored commentary. It is colored commentary. Colorful conversations by colorful people about Christianity, culture, and race. And I am your bumbling host in here today, Markus Lloyd, and with me, as always, is Antwuan Malone. What's up, Antwuan?
Yo, what is up? What is up?
What is up? What is up? And if you're watching on if you're watching on the on the YouTubes and the videos and all the good stuff, you're gonna notice a much better version of us in here. Just we're one of our wonderful staff members, team
Miss
members.
Delightful herself.
That's right. The delightful Chino, the Frappuccino in the house, hanging out with us. It's a fun. So say what's up, Frap. How you doing?
Hey. It's good. How you doing?
that did not sound very.
No, she didn't come out with all the stuff. I was waiting for. Yeah. Come on now. Tell the audience you're in the house today, there, Chino.
Yeah, I'm here. It's good. I'm excited.
Good. I'm glad that you're here. The audience that's listening, they were just waiting for your energy. Yeah. They just needed to hear it all. So
even the people without the video, they knew
that it was coming.
I feel like there's something different.
Yeah, there is something different. We do have Chino, but something else is different. I can't put my finger on it. Mm-hmm. Something else. I feel like there is like more life in the world today. You know what I mean? Like almost double life in the world today.
Oh, really?
It's a really strange sort of thing to be talking about with your friend of 20 years who's the same age as you. But I think no, you have an announcement to make, don't you?
Yeah. Okay, so those of you who were part of it, I don't know which episode it was, but in a previous episode, we talked about the potential of me being a grandfather. Well, it is official as of just a few days ago. The twins are here. Yes. and mostly healthy. Well, my granddaughter.
Ooh, that's interesting to hear. That's weird to hear.
I think that's the first time.
I don't think you've said that yet. That's the
first time I've actually said my granddaughter.
Wow. We caught it right here on Colored Commentary.
Weird, actually.
It's super weird. He might have a breakdown in the middle of the show.
Yeah.
So you know,
Chino, just take over. But my granddaughter, so she be praying for her because she had a few respiratory issues, but I don't think anything that has been looks like the hospital has it under control. So but yes, they are here, 6 and 7 pounds. They were full size.
Look, that's always a funny line when you say it.
Well,
they were full size.
It is because most of the time with twins, you
know
with preemies, or they come out with 4 or 5 pounds, or even sometimes less than that. And so we were really excited that they were 6 and 7 pounds like that. Yeah. That means that they had a healthy time with her pregnancy.
They had a healthy time in the womb.
I wasn't quite sure where to go after I said healthy time.
I was like, I can't wait to hear what the next word is right now.
With mom. And so
yes.
But yes, so fun times. Zachariah and Azalea, welcome to the world.
Yes, please
welcome
spell
to the
Azalea
Malone
because I'm still trying to I need to get it down.
Azalea,
someplace.
Zaliah.
Liah
her name.
That is a black name. If I've heard Azalea,
that's a flower.
I know it is, but you don't spell it like that, do you?
I don't know how.
I don't think you spell Azalea like that. Maybe you do. I've never bought an Azalea.
I don't think. She has. My daughter is very thoughtful and
she is.
Thinks through. So if you ask her why she chose that name, it will not be random.
Oh no.
She's going to be like, oh, it means this, and like she is certainly not shallow. So there's something to that name that she really wants to connect to. So anyway,
fantastic.
Very, very interesting. But yes, thank you for the congratulations and public apology. I did not tell Markus immediately. In fact, he didn't find out until this morning. And,
we are not getting into that on the show. That's
multiple days after it happened.
We're not,
and
my wife knew. But,
I mean, I just keep moving. Like I don't really do a whole lot of announcements.
I love that you're doing.
I don't
this.
have a lot of emotional content, to spend.
A simple "I'm sorry" would be just.
I'm sorry.
Fine.
I apologize. I missed it. I didn't do the right thing as a homeboy.
It's not out of character. Just so you know, like it was not surprising to get that text this morning and find out when the kids.
There's stuff.
I was like,
happened.
yeah, that sounds right. I lose. You don't know. You can lose Antwuan if you're not careful. You'll just lose him for a few weeks. He'll be in a den, and you won't. You got to go get him sometimes. And that's okay. That's all right. Well,
enjoy a good back cave.
Yes. Congratulations, Grantwan. We're glad that you are here. Excited for what's coming up and all that's all that's ahead of you. And
Okay.
the experience
All
of it.
right.
It's going to be
All
fun.
right.
And
there's a GoFundMe for granddads.
Yeah.
I'm just playing. I'm just joking.
It's only slightly joking.
It's not for them. It's for us because they, with the expectation they want us to be buying stuff.
That's
so
right. That's
just,
right.
Go ahead and fun granddads.
I love it.
I'm just playing.
So we're back in here in the studio, and we brought Chino in here because in our previous episode we were talking about nonviolence and kind of the effect and how people have been talking about that lately. We were kind of we had recorded the show, wrapped it, put it out, having some convo, and Chino came and was like, "Hey, that show was terrible. No, I'm just kidding.
That's not what I said.
I know. I like to just no, but they were like, hey, all that stuff was really good. We got some really good compliments on the show from other folks. But when we talk about it amongst our crew, like there's things that they're like, man, there's so many things that you talked about that we know. The Antwuan, to use Antwuan's terms, we understand the paragraphs underneath those headlines that you dropped, but I'm not sure if everybody else is able to kind of follow your mentality or knows all that you know about that in the way that you're thinking about it. And so it'd be really great if you guys could go a little deeper in on some of some specific things that we were wrestling with and that we think other people are wrestling with. And so we're very collaborative and cooperative in our staff. And so if people say stuff, and particularly Chino and Pepper, like those of you who've been with us for a while, you saw maybe our series on Christianity Public Square, and so you got to meet Pepper, you got to meet Chino, and so when they bring stuff, particularly because we're two dudes sitting here, we're like, okay, what do we need to know? That we're open to it. So she brought us some stuff, and we're like, okay, let's get back on the mic and
let's dig into it.
Yeah,
and I love that too. I love that. It's easy when you're in a space that you're, not. I was going to say blind spots, but it's not really blind spots as much as it is. We used to talk this a long time ago. How, you've thought about things a little bit, and so you've kind of closed some bows on some ideas that, by the time we say it, that bow is tied up. But some people, it'll be nice to go through the journey.
Yeah,
and there's always something new that might require unraveling that bow. Maybe there's something that there's an idea that we need to adjust or shift. So I think that's always an open. We're open to that kind of concept too. So anyway, it'll be a kind of part 2, as Markus said, of a conversation that we had a little bit ago.
That's right. That's right.
Fun.
And we're gonna give the hosting role over here to Chino a little bit, right? She can kind of ask some questions, dig a little deeper. She can tell us that she doesn't like what we're saying, and she gets to be in control. So it's a difficult place for me. I
don't know. I think you'll like it. I think it's going to be great.
So again, this is connecting to the nonviolence episode. If you did not check that out, please go back and listen to that so you can get some of that context, and then come back and join us here as we go a little bit deeper in. So Chino, give us a little sense of what's going on and what you're looking for in there.
Yeah. Okay, let's start with something you talked about at the end of the last podcast where you referred to democracy and it being able to be used as a tool. Antwuan had talked about how, in the time when, the gospel and that was being written, they weren't in a democracy and they didn't have access to the same things that we do. So the question is using democracy as a tool, isn't that in a way what Christian nationalists are doing in trying to change the laws to force the way that they think it should operate and bring the kingdom of God into this very physical national government? Is there a difference, or maybe what do you mean by using democracy as a tool?
Yeah, I think it's very much, if I can say it in terms of the way you just articulated with Christian nationalists, I think democracy is a tool. It's just who's wielding the tool. It's always going to be a tool. It's the internet, right? It's a hammer, right? You can use a hammer to hit a nail, or you can use a hammer to hit somebody in the head with it. A tool is a tool. It's just about the motivation that drives the tool. I think the issue that we're having right now with Christianity and the American construct is that they're allowing fear to drive the tool, as opposed to faith to drive the tool. And we see examples of this when you go back into the scriptures. You see the disciples immediately go to the same kind of movement in the beginning of Acts 1, 4 through 8, right? And ultimately, Jesus has just told them this is the ascension. Jesus has just told the disciples that they're supposed to go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And in that context, what they heard is all nations. They said, go baptize all nations, all ethnoses, which means go baptize people who are not like you. Go baptize Gentiles, right? Go get Gentiles and make disciples of them. This is the people who had oppressed them their entire existence. And Jesus has just told them to go and make family with them and make community with them. That would have been surprising, but also super scary, right? To have to go and engage with people who had oppressed you for so long. So they went to the place that I think a lot of folks in Christian nationalism are going right now, is that they were afraid that if those who had oppressed them, or the ones who they think might oppress them in terms of Christian nationalism, if they were engaged, then they might be the Christian nationalists or the disciples. I'll stay in this. The disciples thought they might be in a position where they could get oppressed again. They were afraid. And so what they decided in their brain is, if I can just get power, if I can get power over the environment that I'm doing this disciple making in, then I can ensure my safety while trying to do what Jesus has asked me to do. And so it actually culminates in a question that they come to Jesus to in Acts 1, 6-8, where they come to Jesus and they go, okay, Jesus, is this the time that you are going to, create the kingdom of Israel? This was, as Willie Jennings calls, this was their nationalist fantasy. They were basically saying, hey, are you now going to make a nation? I'll call it, put in our context, are you going to make a Christian nation? And Jesus' answer was, that is not for you to determine, right? That's in the Father's hands. And then he actually gives them what they're supposed to be concentrating on. They're not supposed to be concentrating on making a nation in which they can have power and authority. And then when they do that, they can go after and do what he wants them to do. But rather, what he says is, instead, be witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth, right? Jerusalem being the place that's closest to them, to their people. Judea, those who were maybe in their culture and space, but maybe who were a different ethnic group. And there's the Samaritans, who were the people that they did not like, so they're enemies, basically. And then it was to everyone else that they might run into out into the rest of the world. So what I would say is, democracy being used it's going to be a tool. The problem we're seeing right now is that those who in the Christian space that are looking for Christian nationalism are running out of fear, where Jesus is asking his disciples to run out of faith. So for us, what does that look like? What does it mean to use democracy in terms of faith, in terms of following after Christ and what Christ is asking us to do and what we see Christ doing? And so what you're going to see a lot of times with Christ is how he whatever power he wields, he's wielding it for those who are on the margins, those who can't speak for themselves, those who don't have power. And he's challenging those in power to connect with those who don't have power so that they can understand the true power, which is him, Jesus himself. So that's where I would start with that. Antwuan?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a lot of it's good, especially that
a lot of that, but not all of it was.
I mean,
good.
all of it's good. Yeah.
Too late. You already said what you said.
Acts is such a good passage there, where they're like, hey, so it's now they're still on that political kick.
Yeah.
I think for me, when I think about this question, right, what I'm thinking about is democracy provides us a gift, not a solution. And so so the difference between someone who is stewarding their voice and someone who is pursuing a solution through democracy is different. I think we're called to steward whatever we're given. And so if we're in a context of America and democracy, then we're meant to steward our vote the way we would, the way God, we're meant to steward that with Christian intention, right? And so we should vote and think about our vote in the same way we think about the choices we make every day, what we do with our money. All those things should have been influenced by our connectedness to Christ. Now, the problem comes in expecting a solution out of that vote, or anticipating that the solutions to all of our problems are going to come as a result of that vote. And that's where, for me personally, I draw the line. I'm happy to vote, but I am not expecting legislation to be the ultimate solution to the injustices that I see around me. And so for me, in a democracy, I think that is so much better, and this is the gift of democracy, is the majority voices rule. And so the math for me is, if I can influence, or if the church can influence people to vote differently, vote rightly, vote Christ-like, the people are still driving a democracy. A theocracy is what's driven by God, the people in a democracy. So for me, I think the grassroots approach of, hey, I'm happy to vote, but I'd much rather affect the way people live on an everyday basis, the choices that they make. I think it feels like that's what Jesus was more like when he walked the earth. He didn't go to Rome and to the palaces of Rome and say, hey, change your laws to fit loving your neighbor as yourself. What he did do was go about creating a space where loving your neighbor was contagious and infectious around the people he was around. And before you knew it, you had a crowd of people who was embracing that or would be embracing that. And in an American context, that might actually lead to some political power, but it isn't. That means of power isn't the actual reason that you're not going for the power. It just happens that you've affected enough people. I'll give an example where we were pursuing power. Almost all the big movements I've seen in a democracy in America started grassroots, affect at a ground level, get a groundswell, and then affected the political bloc. The LGBTQ movement kind of is probably maybe one of the more recent examples where when we were younger, those conversations were being had, but it didn't have a lot of political power to them. It wasn't until that group really got to a place where a lot of people started to have some empathy and sympathy toward their particular political positions, and they amassed a crowd, and now they had political voice. But it had to happen at the bottom level. They couldn't go straight to the top and say, hey, make this law. Christian nationalism wants to do it the other way. They don't want to start at the bottom. They don't want to do grassroots. They don't want to do it. They want to go and say, hey, this is God's nation. We actually don't want a democracy. We want a theocracy, and we want that theo to be our theo, not anyone else's. Not only is that a fundamental difference between what America sets itself up to be, but it is a bad strategy biblically and Christologically, because we don't see where that has worked ever. In fact, historically, we've always seen that when Christian or even some religion, we could even say Christian religion. I don't know that I see any Christian religion political entity successful without corruption ending up in it. We've got crusades, we got all of that. So I would say this: your vote is something that you steward, and so you should vote. But for me, the nationalism, Christian nationalism, is pursuing a solution through politics that I don't believe politics can ultimately deliver. I'd much rather pursue the solution of justice through the individual heart and individual persons. That isn't to say that we don't stand up against injustices and laws and we don't steward our voices against those. It's just that I'm not putting all my eggs in that basket. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense.
It does. I think the thing I would push on is that I don't know if it needs to be one or the other, as this is the mode. I think it's collaborative. You know what I mean? Like I think it may be too far to say that this is how Jesus did it and therefore this is the right way to do it. I think Jesus was also a product of his context, right? Like Jesus was not, he didn't have the option, yeah. Right? So, and to the point that you were talking about, he did build a groundswell, and let's just say he was in a democracy. That groundswell would then turn into potentially going after the policies that were actually affecting the community. He just didn't live in a place that had a democracy. So that's why I think it is a gift that we have, is that you can do I think even Christian nationalism, I would say, is a groundswell idea that just has people in power that can actually make it work. And so I think there's a way in which we have to steward both the groundswell and the positions of power that we find ourselves in, right? So yes, we need to be engaging in hearts and minds and all of those levels, and there's people who are really gifted and really good at doing that, and that's part of just community organizing and things of that nature that we get to do with Threaded. But once these people community organize and get power, right? As soon as I become a city council person, I've also then, even though maybe I created a groundswell, I've got to steward that power from the purpose or from the place of faith. I've got to steward that power from the place of responsibility to the things that God has asked us to do, and how He leads us to deal with humanity. And so I think that if anything, both things are important, the policy and the groundswell. But again, what motivation are you stewarding either of those from? I think is really important.
Yeah, I think right. I think you're right in that they're both elements toward alleviating
They're stuff in
injustices.
your their tools in your tool belt.
Yeah. One of them is completely, it feels like it's relying on power as the way to get things done, and the other doesn't. That's where I wrestle. And there is there's an interesting rub right there. I think where especially if like you're a politician, like, again, we talked about this before, there's American justice, there's biblical justice. If you're voted in as an American politician, then what you're ultimately protecting is the Constitution, right? Not the biblical principle, right? You weren't voted in as a Christian, a Christian officer for the kingdom of God. You're voted in as a governor, politics, senator of America.
Sure.
And the ultimate standard is the Constitution. And because the ultimate standard is the Constitution, there will inherently be some disconnect between what the Constitution says and allows and what we as Christians, who are part of a different kingdom and a different, if you will, kingdom constitution, allows. So our vote can only go so far toward achieving kingdom ends. I would also, and I know we got more questions, but I
think some of these questions will actually speak to even what you're talking about right now.
But but there's one more thought that I would throw out here, and that is, what do we think? And this is rhetorical. What do we think Jesus was trying to accomplish when he offers the Great Commission? He says, I want you to be witnesses and go out into the world and make disciples. If you were to say, for what? What is the purpose? Like, what is it that you're trying to accomplish with that, Jesus? Is it just to save people out of hell? Is that the fundamental purpose of making disciples? Or is this Jesus's plan for justice in society? It's a question. Like, or is it neither of those things? Like, what do we think? Because if we allow ourselves to go to the place where we say, Jesus is saying, I want you to represent a just society as witnesses of the kingdom, and I want you to promote and produce that society through the making and developing of disciples from me, then it's possible that what his goal is, one of his many goals, is to represent or to do justice through these disciples. There's a function that it's not just make disciples just for the sake of making it. Like, is there something he's trying to accomplish? You could make the case that his plan for accomplishing justice as it pertains in this context in a sinful world is disciple making. And then it becomes, well, what does it mean to be a disciple? And now you go through and you work through these things. But it's very interesting. It's an interesting thing to wonder if what Jesus is trying to do as he's offering the Great Commission connected to this very goal that we're trying to do, which is to bring justice to the societies that we're in. Does that make sense? The question I'm asking?
Yeah, I think, and again, we don't have to dig too deeply in this, but clearly, Old Testament wise, there were a lot of ways in which he was trying to help the Israelites understand how to lead and run a society.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's ways and there's a lot of justice conversation that goes on. Micah 6:8. I think that's the passage, right? Like, what does the Lord require of you to do? Justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. He's trying to give you a kind of formula, if you will, for how to lead and engage that. So,
well,
I think that makes a lot of sense.
And then there's the Abraham. You're blessed to be a blessing.
Be a blessing, sure.
To call people out. The frustration he expresses in Amos is that you are meant to exemplify a way of living that calls people to who I am, not who's right. So, and the New Testament church's role is to do that same thing, to live in such a way that those outside would be drawn in to, right? And so this is what it means to make disciples. This is how justice is brought into a unjust world. So it begs the question that is what Jesus was trying. One of the many things that he's trying to accomplish in the Great Commission is one of the many of those things, the elimination or the creation of a space where true justice, biblical justice, kingdom justice, not nation-based justice appears. And is he also making the concession that that's going to look like an inner community, not like a national entity? Because he doesn't say go establish a nation to do that. He says be a witness within those nations.
That's right.
Right. So anyway.
So that looks to maybe some of the questions of what does that look like even practically to some extent that maybe we can go deeper in on from the last podcast.
Yeah.
Gino?
Yeah. So, okay, you talked about wielding your vote, but what happens when the vote doesn't go the way that you voted? So there's the sense of like, yes, God is in control, but then does that mean we do nothing? Where does like civil disobedience maybe to come into play? And is that part of nonviolence, or is there a difference there? So if we see that because of the way the vote went and whoever is in power, the laws that they're enacting are directly harming those in our community, what is our responsibility?
There's a couple of questions in there.
Yeah.
One is sort of in your body, which you probably can speak to, this idea of you've got these desires, right?
Sure.
And maybe you can speak to some of that helps us deal with some of that stuff. Potentially, I don't know if that's where you would go or not in there. It's just a foundational like expression. Because the first question I heard was, the vote doesn't go your way and you are disappointed.
You're disappointed. So it's you want to do something about that. You have disappointment, and then after disappointment, you move to destruction. You want to bring your power to change things the way you want it to be. And ultimately that can cause you to be separated and distant from God, in dispute with God. Hey God, how come you're not making this happen? We could break those things down. Before I go further with that, I'm curious about there's a couple things. One, there's an individual responsibility to love your neighbor and to care for your neighbor. So there's the all that is within you, you do it, right? So a not so good example, but
these are always my favorite. A not so good example.
All right, a not so good example.
We got lots. Yeah.
Well, the Good Samaritan is always the one, right? But
okay.
But he goes against the grain of his culture to do what he does here. The Samaritan is not supposed to care for the Jew the way that he does, because there's enmity there. But he goes against the grain to do that. So he, as an individual, or she, because it could be a she,
could be.
But the Samaritan is it's probably a he.
Just keep going.
Anyway, I'm sorry. They act individually, right? And they say, hey, there's something I can do to help this scenario. It would be much harder for that Samaritan to try to convince all Samaritans to treat all Jews a certain type of way, right? It would take longer. And if he were to wait to act individually for the collective to follow, then this person may not ever get anything done. So I think there's something to the alleviation of justice has something to do with what work I can do as an individual. Now, and so when things don't go my way. So I think there's that. And then I think secondly, after the individual, you have to ask yourself, what do you do? And in my opinion, this is where we might just feel differently. There's just several examples of biblical scripture where it says, do what you can legally. And even when it doesn't work out, live in such a way that pushes against the grain, right? And those are all the First Peter 4s.
What do you mean by pushes against the grain?
It's what he means when he says, live in such a way where you're not retributive, that you don't return reviling for reviling. I have to go back to the passage.
Yeah, I hear you.
Where he's saying is, it's right in the context. He's writing to the diaspora. These are people who are in political distress. They are being treated unjustly, and he's writing them, and he say, "Hey, honor the king, even when he's corrupt." This is what it is in 1 Corinthians 3 and 4. Honor there just means follow the laws. It doesn't mean that you agree. It just says follow the law and do what you can within your rights to not be illegal, right? But then it goes on to say, and it follows that with saying the response to the reviling you're getting, the injustice you're getting, don't respond in kind, and to do so in such a way that when people look at you, they're like, hey, you should be responding this way. You're responding this other way. Why are you doing so? And that's when the passage says, be ready to give give an answer for the hope that you have that is nonsensical to the situation that you're actually in. That's 1 Peter 2 through 4. There's another one somewhere else. I can't think of Romans. I think it is Romans 13 and 14, where he's trying to walk the Romans through the Hebrews and the church in there to try to figure out how they deal with the corrupt energy there. So there's a lot of, Jesus was another one. He's dealing with zealots. He's dealing with his crowd. They want to do something against Rome because Rome is indeed unjustly treating them. Jesus doesn't respond the way we would expect him to respond to Rome. So there is certainly enough room there for us to at least acknowledge the uncomfortable historical truth of how Peter, Paul, and Jesus thought we should.
I'm so glad you said that. I didn't know if Mary was coming.
And Mary,
it was good. Thank you.
The way they give us some version of that one, we don't like those answers because they feel ineffective, There's a combination though between what we would do collectively and what we might do individually, and I think that's where some of the challenge is. So anyway, those are some thoughts just to put into the mix.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because the Bible feels in some ways almost bipolar on this to some extent. You've got these examples of where they're like, yes, we're just going to chill and we're just going to do whatever anybody wants us to do. But then there's these examples where it's like, nah, we're going to do something else. We're going against the political powers. And I find it interesting, right? Like, so you talk about the examples you're talking about, I think there's Romans, I think even has something about that as well. And you're talking about First Peter.
And to be fair, these passages are typically weaponized.
Yeah, sure, of course.
To produce a non-critical obedience to government.
Yeah,
which is not the way.
That's not what you're trying to say here.
Yes.
You're just bringing them out because they are places that you still have to wrestle, whether they're being used, weaponized or not. You got to wrestle with them.
And they're said by the top three voices.
Absolutely. And then you got the opposite, right? Then you got people who are like, yeah, but what about Jesus turning over the temples? Turn over the tables in the temple. What about and then somebody was like would say then, okay, but what about Jesus stopping Peter from slicing off the ear, right? And then I think about, you mentioned the term civil disobedience. Like the first time I ever heard the term civil disobedience in reference to the Bible, I think I might have mentioned this in the podcast. I can't remember, but I was talking about Shifra and Antwuan, who were the nursemaids, if you will, or I forget what the verbiage is now, but who were charged by Pharaoh during Moses' time, or actually pre-Moses to some extent, where he was like, hey, I want you to kill Hebrew boys whenever they're born. And that's what they were charged with. They were supposed to, if they go to a house to a Hebrew and they find out that they're having a boy, when that boy comes out, they're supposed to kill that boy. And Shifra and Pua are like, nah, son, we ain't doing that. And they would lie. They went back to the Pharaoh, and he was like, and she's like, they're like, hey, these Hebrew women they get these babies out quick. You know what I'm saying? And they don't tell their friends about them for several days, right? So they get them out quick, and we can't get nothing. We just can't do anything about it. So they lie. You also you just keep following that path, and you got Moses' mom, right? She's supposed to get rid of this baby, and she's like, nah, son, I'm gonna go against the policy, and I'm gonna hide my son for a while, and then I'm gonna put him in the river and just hope that nobody gets him. And then you got Pharaoh's daughter, same thing. Like, hey, this is a Hebrew baby. As a boy, policy says I'm supposed to drown this fool. Nah, I'm gonna bring him in my house. So you've got these three elements of the civil disobedience, these folks going against what was going on. But then you again head back to the New Testament. Jesus like, hey, don't cut off the ear. First Peter saying this, and so it's like it seems like it's this bipolar thing going on. What I find is interesting is I start to think what's kind of underneath what's going on, and if I think about it in terms of what the mission of God, like what God is trying to accomplish. Whenever Jesus is talking about in Jesus' story, when he's trying to do something, and somebody's getting in the way of that, that's when he there's something happens with it, right? So in the temples, right, like that temple was supposed to represent God, and in an environment where the nations could come and they could be treated well, and people were cheating Gentiles and they were lying and messing with stuff. It's supposed to be a house of prayer, and they were disrespecting the temple. So Jesus like, you're actually messing with the message of what God is trying to do. And so he turns it over, like he's mad about that. Jesus is supposed to go die on the cross. He's supposed to be captured. That's what's supposed to happen. That's his mission. So here comes Peter with a sword, cutting off people and trying to fight for him. And Jesus is like, nah, you're messing with my mission. You're messing with where I'm supposed to be going. Get out of the way, right? Now with Moses, you go back in time, like Moses is supposed to come and free these cats, free the Israelites. This is God answering 400 years of the cries of the Israelites so that the Israelites can be free, so that they can live and be messengers and models of Yahweh into the world. And they're stuck. And he needs this, and Moses needs to be there. So when somebody gets in the way of that Pharaoh, then all of a sudden Shiphrah and Puah, they are fighting against that because they're fighting for God's message and mission, and fighting against that thing that's trying to stop it. So I think that that's where I kind of look at it, is like, what's trying to stop God's movement and what God is trying to accomplish? If we find those things, then that's a place where we can actually get involved in whatever tools we can to try to stop that. Now, here's the thing, and I had a pastor tell me this a long time ago. He said, civil disobedience is exactly what it is, but you have to be willing to pay the consequences for what you do. It's not to say that if you want to go out there and you want to lie to the Pharaoh, you got to know that the Pharaoh may catch you in your lie and may execute you. So if you're going to be about disobedience, if you're going to be about, whatever your thing is, pushing against what the government wants to do, just know that the laws of the land are still the laws of the land, and that you will be subject to them. And sometimes that's fine, right? I think even Jesus in his ministry, like, pushed against the ideas of what kingdom looked like and paid the price for it. I think that that's a piece that we have to continue to remember. Like, yes, you can push against it. I think there's precedent for that. But the laws of the land are the laws of the land, and you will pay the consequences. And sometimes you have to go, you know what, it's worth it. And we've seen that. That's where many of them, the ways in which a lot of nonviolence even missions and stuff have happened. It's like, look, we're just going to go out here, we're just going to kneel, and the laws they're going to hit us with dogs and fire hoses, but we're going to take that because we feel so strongly about how terrible these laws are and what they're doing to the marginalized. So yeah, I think the precedent is, step in front of what's ever going on. Just be ready to pay the consequences and know that that's part of how it works.
Yeah. And I mean, it is a little bit, it's hard to be like, hey, this, right? Because scripturally there is both, right? Because you still have Paul, who's, even though I said Paul's writing this, he's written it to the Romans. He's so much of his letters are being written from prison because he was doing what he was pushing against, right? He was pushing against of the rules that were against him, right? You don't preach it. Peter does the same thing early in Acts, where he's like, hey, don't preach this again. They flog him. He's like, I'm glad to be flogged for Christ, and then goes out and immediately preaches again, right? So
Paul gets beat up, thrown out the city almost for dead, and walks back to the city to start over.
Get right back in there, right? Yeah. So there is this. This is where we're saying, where scripturally there's a breadth of example where the Spirit is doing something, and sometimes it leads to these various types of nonviolent disobediences, and sometimes he's calling his people to be a witness amidst this thing, to say something about himself. This is where I think the church as a whole should be, especially for those of us who are Christians. We have to be led by the Spirit. And I know that seems like a cop-out, right? But there is no way to know what God is doing unless the Spirit is truly leading us. And so whenever we do something that's nonviolent, the why has to be connected, I would say, as a believer, to something that God is doing versus something that he is not. And there are moments when we don't know the difference. I was talking about this last night recently, where I'm like, man, you have in Jeremiah, you have Hananiah, which is a false prophet who follows after Jeremiah. Jeremiah tells the people in Jeremiah 25 or 24 that they're going to go into exile for 70 years. And then this false prophet comes up and says, no, God's actually going to only allow for 2 years of punishment. And that's going to be a much more encouraging thing. God's a great God, and he won't do this bad thing to you. And the response that God gave to Jeremiah for Hananiah was, God is upset with you, and you're going to die within the next year because he says, you've caused my people to rebel against me, because they wouldn't accept this exile that they were going to go into. Yeah. Then we get to 29, and he says, while you're there in exile, where you're going to be politically persecuted and separated, I want you to marry, make babies, prosper for the city, all those instructions. That's because God was doing something in the exile, right? And allowing Nebuchadnezzar, his servant, as it says, to create this unjust environment for the purposes that God had deemed appropriate for him. For him, it was a discipline. It was an exile. it would have been out of step for the people to pray and say, God, please remove us out of this exile. God's like, I'm already doing that. What I'm asking you to do is to lean into that and then know that I'm not here to harm you, but I'm here to prosper you. And in Jeremiah 29:11, the point I'm trying to make in all that is we can't know whether what God is doing in any given moment is something, the injustice that we're seeing is something he's allowing for a particular reason that we should run up against, or whether it's something that we should accept and live through. We need the Spirit of God. We need the people of God to have a connectedness to what God is doing so that we don't run in either direction. Because in any moment you could do either one. I mean, Israel had a whole army. And so they defended themselves. They fought in wars. They did these things, right? And so I don't think it's a clear-cut piece. If I were advising someone who's in front of me, I say, listen, examine your why for why it is you want to pursue the thing that you're wanting to be nonviolent about. Prayerfully consider whether you feel like God is leading you in that direction, because there is no success without the Spirit of God going before you. And if you don't have it, then you have to wrestle with why God is saying, don't go to Asia to Paul, right? Or don't do these things that feel to you like they're supposed to happen, and be courageous to do the things that he is calling you to do. Daniel in the lion's den, others who did who did the disobedience and took it forward. So you have so many examples of both sides of this movement that I think there's a lot of prayer that needs to be involved in it, and the spiritual leadership sensitivity to what the Spirit may be doing in a particular space and where you want to get involved with the Spirit.
And one thing you said that I think was really important is being an American, and particularly an American Christian, we are not used to having to think about or deal with disappointment, right? Like that's just something like we should be able to get what we want and do what we want to do. Disappointment is not part of surely that's not something that's a part of the Christian life. And that's something that we wrestle with quite a bit. You do have these desires, and these desires are great, wonderful desires that we have. Like we want to see immigration. We want to see things in racial justice. Like we have these desires. And in the midst of seeing things that don't match with those desires, we can either, move to making demands for these things to happen, or we can lean in and trust that God is seeing all of that, and God is moving with intention and purpose. And in either of those cases, right, whether you make demands, if your demands are not met, it leads to disappointment. And sometimes you sit back and you trust in God, and it's still the thing that you trust in God. The thing still happens.
Still disappointment.
And you're still in disappointment. And so then you have to figure out, well, where do I go from here? Now I'm in this disappointment, right? I can either move into a kind of destruction mode to destroy, which ultimately puts you in a place where you might do something that actually puts you in dispute with God himself. Or you move to this place of really lamenting the thing that you don't get to experience, that you don't get to, that you had this desire for, and then move to a kind of, instead of being in that mode of disappointment, you move to going to God in petition and thanksgiving, which seems absolutely counterintuitive, right? Like I'm going to go to God thanksgiving for these things that I'm dealing with, I'm anxious about, but the Scripture tells us that in the midst of that anxiousness, that the peace of God, that transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your mind in Christ.
Yes. So
right?
Your heart, your desires,
yes.
it will reshape your heart, and it will help your mind. So despair, anyway, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
We don't want to get into preaching.
Yeah, we don't get to preaching too hard, but the recognition is that disappointment is actually a part of life. It's what you do with that disappointment that really determines.
Yeah, it's in Peter, that same passage we were talking about, where he says, don't be surprised when these fiery trials come your way. So he's saying you're going to have these difficulties. And he's trying to prepare. As much as difficult as that First Peter passage is, I think he's literally writing to this question as best he can without the democracy piece.
Okay.
To that audience. That audience is in a political distress.
Yeah.
And Peter, the same Peter, as we've said before, the same Peter that was ready to go, has learned that not all action is good action. And not all action is in alignment with what God is actually doing, and so he's impressing upon them to make sure that not give up the witness in their responses. Now, in the civil rights movement that we had, we got a chance to see the witness and the nonviolent action work together. And in a way, Jesus was made greater because his methodology of nonviolence seemed to be contributive to a solution.
Yeah.
But the reality is that a lot of times the way Jesus goes about stuff looks like it ends in a crucifixion. It ends in a cross. And that part is really hard for us to get our heads wrapped around because we want effectiveness for very good reasons.
Right.
We
and the cross is the end, as opposed to pushing to beyond the cross to resurrection to eternal life.
Yes, that there's not more to it. Right.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. The Christ feels final, so it feels like you've lost. Right. And Jesus reshapes the story, says that's not the end. But for good reason. So I can see where people are like, man, I hear you, Antwuan, but if somebody comes in and tries to, if the government comes in and tries to take my house from me, I'm going to fight against that. I'm not going to act like that.
Try Jesus, but don't try me.
That kind of business. And I get it. And I'm not saying to don't do that. I'm just saying your first allegiance is the kingdom of God to what the Spirit is doing at any given moment. Anytime you're acting against that, you're rebelling. And sometimes God is bringing these things to us, right? Ezekiel is brought to a valley of dry bones by the Spirit, right? Jesus is led to the wilderness
for temptation,
right, by the Spirit. Nebuchadnezzar is the servant of God, brought to bring a certain type of discomfort to a space, right? And so being able to have that distinction requires a connection again to the Spirit and what he's actually doing, and at least asking, right? By default, I think we can always care for our neighbor, right? I don't think there's ever a problem. We can't use our vote for our neighbor. We can't vote. We can't use the tools that are available to us. Nonviolent protest is always available, right? That's not illegal to do. So there's a series of things. Disruption in some ways, or making things uncomfortable, it's not illegal. It just causes people to be upset. So
it's a tool.
So social, so social disruption is not necessarily a bad thing. Going around breaking in people's homes, that's illegal. Don't do that as a part of your disruption, right? So your real protest. So anyway,
that's good.
I don't know if that's helpful or not, but it may only further complicate.
Well, you will be, again, you may be disappointed that the answer is not as clear as you'd like it to be.
Yes.
Which I'm sorry, unfortunately that's going to be.
But I think it's the wrestle. I think it's what is why is there. Yeah, I think it's why Jesus.
It's like the tension is supposed to create a way in which you slow down and actually have to think about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Go ahead. Gina, do you have something?
Yeah, there's two different thoughts. There's part of me that wants to press slightly further into the extreme, which I feel like in these scenarios is where people go. And World War II always gives lots of examples of what it looks like to stand up against from, those who hid the Jews and smuggled them out of the country. That was a very, illegal, but also, and going against what the government, was saying at that time. So I think there's that. I don't know if that's necessarily a question.
Well, I want to go back to what I said earlier is like, the right thing to do was to hide them. In the sense of like, this is humanity that's being taken out without giving the honor of being seen in the image of God. And you got a power structure that's actually trying to exterminate God, right? God in his image. So getting in the way of that I think it's absolutely the right thing to do. What I said earlier is, remember there are consequences for it. You can do that. But don't think that just because I did it, that I'm not going to pay the price for it. Right? We don't get those stories. There are plenty of people who did and tried to do it, and they paid the price for it. And God's blessing them. God's like, hey, you did the right thing. I think we get into these modes where we think about our life is the life, and that everything is centered around what we do, and we forget that, particularly when you submit yourself to Christ, like you are actually a tool that Christ is using here on earth to further what he's trying to do. And sometimes that means you're actually going to sacrifice yourself for the thing that God's asking you to do, because Christ isn't he's not overly, he wants you to have an abundant life here, but he also recognizes that this is not the end. There's actually more that he's preparing for, and you are submitting yourself to him is to be used as a witness for him in all, Judea, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, ends of the earth, and what you're your work of witness may be to harbor a family of Jews during World War II and get caught and get executed with those family of Jews. But the fact that you did it was a witness to what a Christian would do in the midst of that situation.
And yeah, and also like I think to your question is like, should we have even gone into war with them then? Or do we just sit back and let it happen, right? We as an American, as a nation, and I think that this goes back to what I was kind of making the distinction slightly between the individual and the collective. There's various levels of responsibility. We can't really get into all the details around. Only got time to get into all the details around that. If I go into a playground and I see a grown man beating up on a child, I am going to go over there and remove that grown man as best I can from that child. Right.
I may remove his head.
I'm going to step in because there's a very clear something there that I can do something about. That's me as an individual. You can make the case that there's a view about that at the collective level, right? What a city does, what a nation does, right? How do we govern the world as these various sizes of playgrounds and bullies and people that show up in them, and what our role is in those, right? And what does it look like to stand in front of a man, right? And so when you're talking in a war, nations and the national leader, you have to talk about that at a national level of response, and that ends up looking like war. We're going to go take out Hitler. The way to do that is for a nation to say, hey, we feel like the moral thing to do is this. Now, I would go further and say, I'm not sure we got into World War II because God told us to, even though that might be some justice was had. I don't know that we were doing it in the name of God, right? I think we may have been doing it in the name of some other standard of justice, right? And so I want to continue to push us into what is God doing versus what is national or political. I think there's distinctions, and sometimes they are congruent and they work well together, and sometimes they're at odds, and it just makes it to where I don't trust the political social activism. This is, again, me personally, as a clear enough why for my engagement. Sometimes it will be what I feel like God has called me in to do, and sometimes it won't be. And there's multiple ways to combat a particular scenario. But I do think that with World War II, yeah, I think we should have gotten into that. And I think we should have stopped him. And I think anytime there's an opportunity for us to, within the World Council, step into injustices in other countries, I think it's something you got to look at. So, yeah.
Yeah, but what you're talking about.
But I'm saying I don't know that it's connected to the Christian movement.
Correct. That's right? What I was going to say.
I don't know if it's connected to, hey, as believers, we stepped in. And we stepped in as Americans, believing in what our American justice ideals were. And those governed those choices. And it happened to be congruent with what God would do, maybe what God would want for those persons.
Yeah, I think I think that's exactly right. And it's such a good articulation, Antwuan. Like, again, we function sometimes as if we say when we should have gotten in there, like we Christians got in there, and it's if America is God's nation, right? I think about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was trying to assassinate him. I was like, that's a Christian response, if you will.
Take him out.
You know what I mean? So yeah, it becomes a little diluted or complicated or misrepresented when we start engaging conversations around big nation things that are happening around the world and saying that America should do it because of Christian values.
The blot on Christian history, one of the
that's right,
is the Crusades,
right?
Which was the kingdom's army,
not
doing God's things and not doing them God's way, but believing it, and putting His name on it, right? And so I think these are things that just we were comfortable with.
And I wonder, look, you say that, and I just wonder if part of the reason why he said don't create a nation is because it's impossible to be a nation and be able to function in the ways that are going to be because ultimately the road that we see when you follow Christ is the road to crucifixion. It's a road to death, burial, and resurrection. But it's it is not surprising that 11 out of the 12 disciples were martyrs, or 10 of the, I know one of them killed themselves, but these cats didn't make it, because the sacrifice and to follow Christ is at least opens you up to the possibility that you may have to make the decisions that in following Christ may end your life, and may put you in danger. And so to lead a country that way is not, it may not be a responsible position when you have so many people underneath you that you're governing. Perhaps I'm not saying that's true. I'm just trying to recognize, like, if when Christians were in power, they and had their own nation, they and the Hebrews themselves, they were irresponsible, and did not do well.
And so many of the other, Ahab and others.
Yeah. So what's up, Chino?
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know which one to go with first. We'll go with this one first. So when you were talking about the part about witnesses in, or like looking at what God is doing in the situation, it reminded me of, I think it was Silas for sure, is one of the people that was in jail. And maybe he was there with Paul, or maybe it was Barnabas. But they're in jail. They're singing the hymns. I think the angel comes. There's the earthquake. Like, everybody's loose. They could leave. They were essentially like wrongfully imprisoned for speaking out about Jesus, and they don't leave, they stay. And the guard comes, and then there's this moment of, because they're still there, they're able to share like the testimony of Jesus with him, and I believe convert his whole family, comes to believe in God. And so I was just wondering, because that feels like that might be an example of, like, here they had their freedom and they chose not to take the freedom because God, like, listening to the Spirit, God was moving in that situation, and them being able to share the love of Christ was enabled by the fact that they stayed.
Yeah. And he's probably one of it's potentially believed that jailer, the Philippian jailer, that's the story you're talking about, was one of the first converts for the Philippian church that would later get started, that Paul ends up writing to. But I think that is an example of being connected to what God is doing and recognizing that the situation you're in isn't about, maybe about something more. The Spirit may be doing something more there than rescuing you from your prison, right? But there's that's a context for you to live within. Now that gets, there are extremes, and there are absolutely situations where that's not what God is not putting you in an abusive scenario. Like, I want to be clear that we're not excusing a series of negative and bad behaviors. But I am saying that it could be true that God's people in America, let's just say America, could be doing something, and it includes a series of injustices that could happen, and our connectedness to that would inform how far we push against the changing of all those things. And that sounds like a very loose target, and hard to like nail down. But I think we've seen it in scripture where that's happened. And sometimes I think even if we look at our own lives, there are moments where we can look back and we say, I didn't like where I was at that point, but I think that I was doing this thing, and it was a discipline, or it was Hebrews 12 talks about discipline, and so again, I used the Jeremiah scenario where he's bringing something on, and that's actually designed to make things better for the long haul. So
yeah, it's so hard to me, particularly in the book of Acts. There were so many things that God was igniting in the book of Acts, and in really supernatural ways that we don't see regularly every day. I mean, the tongues of fire coming down at Pentecost. He repeated that at the Gentile Pentecost in what, Acts 10, I think, with Peter and Cornelius. Acts 8 with the Ethiopian eunuch, where Philip is there talking to the eunuch, and the eunuch decides to follow Christ, and then he's zoomed away someplace. this particular thing that you're talking about, where they're in a cell, they cast out a demon and a girl, and they got arrested, and they're singing hymns, and the angels show up, and the earthquake comes, and the things opens up. Like, I don't think these are great examples, honestly, to kind of try to build your practical, application around. I think they're really important because they show that God is at work. And I think that's where I think a lot of this conversation is being centered around, is like, how do you know God is at work in the decision that you're about to make?
Yeah,
that's the question. Like, how do you know that you're not like Paul, where you're like, the things that I want to do, I don't do. The things I shouldn't do, that's what I do. Like, how do you know how are you able to determine what's flesh and what's spirit? Right. And that's Galatians. I forgot the friggin' fruit of the spirit passage, but
5.
Thank you. Galatians 5. So, I mean, look, I've been in situations where I've had really good ideas about what I wanted to do in the midst of my flesh. I had something that happened to me the other day, actually. And literally, I got in my Bible study that morning and I was hit with this Galatians 5. And it's like, and it was the fruit of the spirit is love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness, gentleness and self-control. Against such things there is no law. There's no law against that. But it continues on and it says, and those who follow Christ have crucified their flesh and the passions and their desires. And I was like, oh man, I was so mad at God, because I had some really good passions and desires that I wanted to go take out on somebody. And he reminded me, yes, but the fruit of the spirit is love, joy, peace. Now, I'm not saying that that's the way it's going to work for everybody, but here's what I'm saying is, like, whatever you're thinking about, whatever your response is to injustice, you have to wrestle with the fruit of the spirit. You have to wrestle with how God is guiding how the spirit of God is guiding you. If you're a Christian and you're not wrestling with that, if you're not looking to submit there, but you wanting to submit, you just got to wrestle. Is this flesh? Is this spirit? That's all.
It is. Yes. Yep.
Is there another question?
There is another question. Yeah, I'm determining whether I want to do this first, but we're not going to do it. Yeah. So this is 1 Peter 2. If whoever's listening to this, just listen to what we're saying, and then that book is so helpful to this convo.
Yeah. Do you have more questions, Chino? Any Russells? We appreciate the audience hanging out in the midst of this. If you got in here, they're like, this is good. Chino should be here more often. Yes.
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot at this point. I think just like thinking in terms of the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King and what you were talking about with just that wrestling of like, is it spirit or is this flesh? And like the letter from a Birmingham jail where, the pastors are like, hey, you need to be patient and like God's justice is going to come. And, Martin Luther King is like, no, the time is now. And just how we have to prayerfully consider, is the time now? Which way does it go?
Yeah, I think that's such a really good thing to articulate, because like I just said a second ago, like a lot of people, they're taking these kind of moments out of the Bible and kind of building their sort of idea of what that looks like. And there's absolutely ways that I agree, should do that. What's really great, and what's I think perhaps just the providence of God, like that you get these examples throughout our history for each generation, particularly to as a kind of I don't know, just someone to give us an example, right? So Dr. King, and again, people would take that letter from Birmingham jail. He says the time is now. It's like, and so they hear like, hey, we're not going to wait around. The time is now, and they forget like all the other years that came before this letter, all the action, all the prayer, all the organizing, all the other people, all the everything. Like Dr. King didn't just wake up in that jail and be like, time is now. Like this is a lifetime, right? At least the later part of his like a lifetime where he is being he's having to wrestle with these questions. He's coming out of a collective group that has been wrestling with the idea of what does a response to injustice look like for generations, right? In slavery, and Jim Crow, right? In black codes, in lynching. Like it's not like it was just somebody woke up one day and it's like, this is the thing. You have to evaluate like black people particularly they had to wrestle with this in homes, in their schools, in their churches for generations. to the point where it was finally so prayerfully understood and so spiritually led, that it wasn't a question. It was how we do it. And what's interesting again is, yes, the time is now. How then did this gentleman, this preacher, lead? He led in nonviolence. How interesting. After all that processing, and Antwuan mentioned earlier, I mean, the civil rights movement from a nonviolent standpoint, and I shouldn't say this because the civil rights movement was a collaborative of a lot of things. There's actually a way in which the threat of violence from a Malcolm X actually made the nonviolent look so much more palpable. But either way, those things work together. That's one of the rare times that we can look in the American history and see actual policy change that actually protected the marginalized and the poor and offered opportunity for the immigrant. That's one of the rare times we can see that actually came in such a way that it benefited those folks who were on the margins, and it came through people standing up and organizing in lots of ways.
To continue after,
and again, as like I said, and they paid consequences for this. All we get is these fine movies where people are like the triumph, but you don't get all those other folks who died in the midst of it, who lost their jobs and their families and their homes. Like, we don't get all those stories. Like, there is a road you are standing on the shoulders of sacrifice to even get to triumph. So it requires a lot of connectedness to history, ancestry, and to the Spirit of God as you make these moves. And I think there are moves that need to be made. Just go with confidence that you're connected to the Spirit of God as you do it, as opposed to your flesh. That's all.
And most of the things that people are going to do, again, they're legal things to do.
That's a great.
You know what I'm saying?
Too.
Like when someone say, "Hey, we got to do something," okay, like there are legal things to do, like protest, organize. No one's saying to not do those things, right? Nonviolence is and some of the judicial breaking of laws in order to make a point that those require some discernment. But man, I mean, a lot of times God is moving in certain people in such a way that they're going to be the ones to help move the thing, and then that may be that's fine. You know, I am second guessing. Yeah, I'm second guessing. I would second guess anytime we have to do something that's illegal, right? Because again, I'm thinking a lot about what for me is a scriptural charge for the believer to protect itself and its reputation as a witness in a given space. So I'd be wrestling through. I'm not saying we should never do those illegal things, so there are some things that we should do, but anyway, those are where the wrestle is. But most of the people who are like, "Hey, we should do something," I'm like, "Yeah, let's make the organization, let's make the nonprofit, let's build let's tackle this idea." The vote is one way to deal with issues, but there's other ways for us to take it straight to the community. There's other ways to reimagine our churches. I will say this: I use Jeremiah a lot in this show, but one of the things that Jeremiah proclaimed prior to this mode of 70 years was, "I've sent you prophets and teachers to tell you and to warn you repeatedly about where you've been and you haven't listened." And I think that's a part of it too. I think there's a challenge to our church leaders to be people who God wants to speak through. People are asking a question like you asked, like, "Hey, I don't know what God is doing." Well, sometimes God is bringing a pastor or a preacher or church leader, and that's part of their role, is to help us understand in a collective sense what God may be doing in a given scenario. We don't have as many of those, and when we do, sometimes we're a little cowardice in how we would step into or not step into saying don't do something or to do something, right? So I would be praying also for our church leaders and for our pastors, that whatever the Spirit is doing, that they have a good sense of it, and that they're not caught up into some sort of matrix where they're missing it. Because so much of what God is doing with his collective people, I don't believe he's gone away from using leaders and leader voices to galvanize and to bring people forward into moments that he's called them into, to serve people. And again, it doesn't need to have the political color on it. It could just be like, we're just going to go and serve these people and meet these needs, and educate and organize and so forth and so on. So I think there's a lot of work to do. I hope that at the end of this show, what I am not saying for Antwuan particularly, what I am not saying is that you should sit around and fold your hands and do nothing at injustices. That's not what I'm saying. I think there's an individual responsibility. I think you make a good point that there are moments when God does things. I think the picture I used was David slays Goliath with a slingshot and rock, but he doesn't go about doing war with slingshots and rocks after that. There's a moment where God does something special with the slingshot, but after that, when David's fighting wars, they got shields and swords, and they're using war strategy because that's the way it's done, and that's what he's taught. And he stewards the knowledge and the skill that God has given him to make the world a better place. So there are moments when God's going to do something special and significant, and those are not meant to be prescriptive. And then there are other moments where we're supposed to use what we know, what gifts we have, what things we have, our vote, our discernment, our skill, our empathy, the grace that we have in us, and use that toward the sake of the church and for the community. And I think that's part of what it means to be a disciple. It's one of the aspects of what it means to be a disciple is to reach out and to serve and bring the service to others, the stewardship of the things that you have. So I'm not advocating for apathy, and I'm not advocating for sitting on your laurels. What I am advocating is whatever it is, whatever passions we have and whatever injustices we pursue, that we follow the Spirit in the pursuit of eliminating those and not act outside of the Spirit. And whatever it takes to kind of get there, to be whether that's our individual lives, our communal lives, what have you, let's pursue that as believers and work in that space.
Yeah, and I think that this may be the last thing here on this is period. I want to acknowledge that there's folks out there who, as they listen, they want to like get in it, like let's go do it. We get that a lot. Like people are ready to do it. They're ready to go. Here's why I understand this frustration too is like one of the things we talked about a couple of times on the show is that there are other tools that are legal tools that can be used to actually fight against these injustices. And yet what I would say is in many places, there are not a lot of people who are wielding these kinds of tools, right? There's not a lot of people like we know in Texas generally, and definitely in the North Texas area, when I'm talking about community organizing is not something that people do here. It's not like we don't have lots of organizations. Like you go to New York, you go to Chicago, LA, you got these community organizing organizations, you go to Bay Area. But in North Texas, like we've tried to have some of those organizing, they just don't survive. Even the work we do has to be supplemented by other stuff because just doing community organizing isn't going to be enough, like to survive as an organization, right? So if you are those kinds of person who want to do things, there's lots of different tools out there. There's community organizing, there's advocacy, there is activism, there is transformational justice. There's just different ways to approach.
There is voting on non-presidential votes.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, like really get involved. Like,
Mayor,
look, I work
city.
with the city government, and there's so many legislations that have come down from the state representation of Texas that's just creating chaos in our city right now. And people from our city come to us and they're like, "Hey, this is a problem. Why is this happening?" And we're like, "Look, you're the one who voted for these representatives to be at the top level in Texas, and so now you're reaping the consequences of some of that stuff at your schools and in your homes and your neighborhoods, right? So voting is a great thing. Learning about the people that you're voting for, and not just voting because they have a cross on them. Like just because they have a cross doesn't mean that they're doing cross things. They may be doing other stuff. So that's important. Activism and gathering people together to move, looking for those organizations that are doing that and becoming a part of the work that they're doing, lending your gifts and your skills and your energy to those organizations, wherever you are, like that, they would die to have you. They would love to have you. They'd also love to have your finances to help them move things along, because sometimes it just takes financial energy to do things and to create the things that need to happen. So if you're sitting back and you're unsatisfied and you really want to get in on it, fine, go do it. But do it with people who know how to do it, who know how to do it well, who this is what they do. And if there's a gap, then fill the gap, create something new, but don't create it as if you know how to do it, but go learn how to do it. Go get under somebody and be mentored by somebody who knows how to do this effectively and who's seen effective change by the things that they do. Learn from them and then go and create it in your space. So there's ways to do it that are legal ways to do it, that apply pressure, and that I can tell you from experience feel pretty satisfying when you see some people that are in your power positions in your cities, in your states, having to squirm and get out of things because you put so much pressure on them to change and to do the things that they're doing. There's something super satisfying about that for your flesh, if you will, if that's what you're looking for, a little bit of flesh hit, that is also still following after the Spirit of God in a nonviolent way. So I just want to encourage that. And in an American society that's very individualistic, we think when we hear this, I've got to do something, and that's already a bad start. If you're starting with I've got to do something, it's a bad start. The change comes through we, and so where is the we that you want to get connected to, and that's the stuff that you need to be looking for. So I appreciate all this. This was fun. This was good, Chino. Thank you for coming in. Give the audience the shout for Chino in here. Yeah, she did such a.
Oh, there they are.
Thank you. Take a bow, Chino. That's some good stuff. Fantastic. Did you have a good time putting us? I know you like putting us on the hot seat. So did you enjoy that?
Oh yes, of course. It's always fun asking the hard questions. So
great. Well, and we appreciate you doing that and inspiring this sort of follow up to the other episode. Again, if you didn't get to see the other episode, check it out. I don't know the order that we got it coming in, so I don't know if it's going to come right after or it'll be another show in between. But so whenever that comes, go check that back out. And thank you guys for listening. Obviously, this has been a little longer than we wanted to go, but I think some of the really good stuff, engaging some of the questions and answers, hopefully we're instructive and inspiring to you. We're excited to do. We love having this kind of venue to do it, and grateful, obviously, for Antwuan being in here. Grandpa, Antwuan, G-Pop, whatever, Gigi. 20, I don't know, whatever you're gonna call you, bro. Congratulations. I would say I'm proud of you, but I don't know if that's the right way to say that.
I didn't do it.
You really do. I mean, you had the original. I don't know. You are a part of it.
They wouldn't be here without me.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So congratulations for creating.
I'm the one.
Fantastic. Okay, hey, this has been Color Commentary, Colorful Conversations by colorful people about Christianity, culture, and race. And we say all the time as you're coming in here, when we say the word colored, we're talking about looking through different lenses and all the ways that you can see the world. And we hope that this episode and all the episodes that we do have given you and can give you perspective, maybe into somebody's perspective that you didn't know was out there. And so we need you to be open to that, not only as you listen to the show, but as you go out into your world. And it's because of that we tell you to stay colored.